Hello, pushers of cardboard, wherever you may be. I'm Grant Linneberg, coming to you from the unseasonably warm and relatively snowless Calgary. This is episode 26 of Pushing Cardboard, Kevin Bertram and Napoleon 1807. As the title suggests, this episode features an interview with Kevin Bertram of Fort Circle Games, as well as a look at Napoleon 1807 from Shakos, as well as all the other chatter you've become accustomed to. So let's dive right in. Let's start with news and what I've been playing. A fair bit of news this time, including some about pushing cardboard. I'm starting a monthly newsletter to go along with the podcast. If you're a member of the website, you'll be signed up automatically. And don't worry, there's an unsubscribe link in every issue if it's not for you. If you're not a member of the website, please join. There's an opt-in option right on the sign-up page. Or if you want to get the newsletter but don't want to join the website, you can still sign up using the link on the home menu at the website. I intend to use the newsletter to provide links to some of the news items I talk about in the podcast, as well as feature things that don't make it here. Point to articles or videos that don't get much attention in this audio format. Sticking with the website, there's now a donation link for anyone interested in chipping in. Costs aren't too bad for this venture, but there are fees for web hosting and podcast hosting and the gear used. And I still pay for 95% of the games that I talk about here. So look for the link on the website if you're into that. One final reason to drop by the website. We're doing a poll of your favorite games from last year, but the twist this time is we're including games from the last 2 years, as we've found it takes that long or longer to get new games to the table for many of us. So go to polls under the articles menu on the website and let us know what you've been enjoying. Log in first if you're a member, but anonymous entries are fine as well. Compass Games have launched a Kickstarter for a new game from Adam Starkweather. Enemy at the Gates is a Cold War Gone Hot title set in 1985. And they're also taking registrations for Compass Games Expo 2024. So check out the Compass Games website for that. This isn't really news in that many folks expected it, but it's now official. Votes for Women won the 2023 Summit Award. It's a terrific game, and in related news, it's now also available to play on Rally the Troops. Academy Games also has a new Kickstarter for a game called Fief England. It's a follow-up to Fief France and plays 2 to 4 players in 90 minutes. Check their website out for more info on that. If you're a Last 100 Yards player, check out the GMT website. As well as living rules for this series of games, they've now put up links for living missions, meaning there's files for any of the scenarios that had errata for any reason. ATO magazine announced that they now have the rights to Mike Ranella's excellent Stalingrad Verdun on the Volga game. It's been out of print for a while, and ATO is publishing it as a magazine game. There's to be new scenarios included as well. Personally, I hope there's no changes to the map or counters, as I don't want to have to replace my copy. And if you're a long-time listener, you know I really like this game. Search the website for references to it, and you'll see it's been featured in a past episode, and I think I did a YouTube video on it as well. Over at GMT, they've added a couple new titles to their P500 list that interested me. Hammer and Sickle is a 4-player game about the Russian Civil War, and they've acquired the rights to Wings for the Baron, which is a popular game that had been produced a few years ago. They're going to produce what they describe as a deluxe version of this game, so jump on that if you're a fan. And then finally, last bit of news is that the latest issue of C3I magazine, number 37, has just gone up for pre-order. It features an Ancients game done in the style of Mark Herman's Gettysburg and Waterloo games. And speaking of Mark Herman's Gettysburg and Waterloo, I think the Gettysburg one, maybe not, maybe both, I think just the one. I think the Gettysburg one, it's been added to Steam. So if you're a Steam computer game user, I think it's up on Steam for like $4.99 or something like that. So check that out. What's on the table? Well, I'm going to scale back this session a bit and only mention a couple things each episode. It'll be a work in progress for a while. I got the impression from some of the survey responses that this wasn't a popular part of the podcast, so we'll see if trimming it down a bit makes it a little better. Having finally got my act together to get restarted with one of my PBEM partners, Wendell, we're now playing This War Without an Enemy. This should be interesting as we played a couple games of Unhappy King Charles a couple years ago. For those unfamiliar with those titles, both games deal with the English Civil War. We're starting with a small 6-turn scenario to get our feet wet, and it'll be interesting to see how the two games. I don't want to really compare them in terms of quality, but just in terms of mechanically how they, what the differences are in how they handle the subject matter. On top of all the PBEM games and the Rally of the Troops games that I have on the go, I also tried out the latest game from David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, General Orders World War II. As is the case with these designers, when I first looked at the description of it, I thought it was going to be a simple game, too simple for me, not historical enough. But knowing that I'd been wrong before, I ordered it anyway. Well, it's not particularly historical other than the setting and the type of units involved, but it is a terrific game. It's been described as a worker placement World War II game, and I suppose that's true. It leans way over to the game side of the realism versus game spectrum, but I'm fine with that. I like games, and I'm sure I'll do more with it down the line. New games to the collection. Well, a whack of new stuff this month, as I bought a bunch of games from game artist Nils Johansson, who is doing a major purge of his collection. I'll start with what I got from him. Bradley's D-Day. This is an ATO game, and I already had its sister Monty's D-Day, so I wanted to check that out. Clash of Giants 2 and Clash of Giants 1, the first Ypres and Galicia 1914, and then the campaigns of Tannenberg and the Marne 1914. These Clash of Giants games, I already have the Clash of Giants Civil War game, and I really enjoyed the system, so I jumped at the chance to get these two original games that were done on the First World War. Le Franc-Tireur number 13, the Crimean Campaign. This is third-party content for ASL from France. I have a couple of their things already, and they're top-notch, so it was easy to jump on this. France 40 from GMT. Nils threw this one in for free. Thanks, Nils. It's new in Shrink. I guess now I have to decide whether to play it or wait for the new updated version, as there's a new version on the P500 list that makes a couple tweaks to the system. I don't know if there's going to be an upgrade kit or not, so I'll have to check all that out. And then finally, a more obscure game called Victory in Normandy. This is a folio-style bagged game that I'd heard good things about. I can't remember the publisher offhand, but when I saw it and it was a good price, it was. I remember reading good things about it, so I jumped on that as well. In terms of other stuff that I either bought or came in from pre-orders, I got The Hunt, which is a new game from Matthias and Engen Kramer. Matthias designed Watergate, which I really like, so I wanted to check out more from him. Iron, Blood, Snow, and Mud from Phalanx came in. I'd pre-ordered that on their P300 list. Liberty or Death, the American Insurrection. This is Harold Buchanan's coin game. I never had a copy of it before, and it had been out of print every time that I was down at GMT West. So I P500 it when the reprint came out. And then finally, a couple games I got through Revolution's winter sale this year. Red Typhoon, the Soviet Winter Counteroffensive, 1942, and Warsaw, 1920, Lenin's Failed Conquest of Europe. This latter game, I know it wasn't a big seller for Revolution, probably because the subject matter. I mean, Warsaw 1920 is not the Bulge or Gettysburg or Waterloo, but I remember talking to Roger Miller at Revolution a year or two ago, and him saying that it's an excellent game and a great game system. So I don't know. Hopefully, maybe the designer will do more with that system, or I don't think there's much to do to try and spur sales of the title at this point. Anyway, that's it for new games. Newbie tips. Well, just a quick one this month. I just want to mention another war game term from our ongoing glossary, which you can see in our on our website. Iron Maiden. No, not a reference to the crap 80s band that sold 1 million t-shirts that maybe your uncle still wears in the basement. But it references back to a medieval torture device. But in wargaming, it refers to a certain type of rule. An Iron Maiden rule is a rule that forces a player to do something that was done historically, but we would never do in hindsight. Maybe think of General George McClellan in Civil War games. Historically, he never attacked or pursued even when he had overwhelming numbers. As gamers, we would attack with his army every chance we get because it's always so strong. So a designer has to figure out a way to get McClellan to behave more as he did historically. Some find clever ways to do it, and some use an Iron Maiden rule to restrict us. Check the glossary on the website, and you'll get more info on this term and many others. All right, let's dive into our featured game this month. This is Napoleon 1807 by Denis Sauvage, published by Shakos Games. This is the middle child in a series of 3 sister games, Napoleon 1806, Napoleon 1807, and Napoleon 1815. I have all 3, but this is the first one that I've managed to play opposed. 1807 finds Napoleon in Poland and features famous campaigns such as Friedland and Eylau. Included in the game are 7 campaign scenarios and 3 shorter battle scenarios. Some of the campaign scenarios are duplicates, one with a historical setup and then one with a free setup. This is a block game, but it's not much like other block games you may have tried. Unlike commands and colors, for example, the blocks are stickered with the unit identity on one side only, so there is the fog of war we see in many block games. But unlike games like Hammer of the Scots series, there's no turning the block from edge to edge to edge to indicate how its units are reduced. Instead, each player has a side display with all their leaders and corps listed on it, and there they keep track of each corps' strength and number of infantry and cavalry, as well as each unit's fatigue level. Crucially, each player also has a screen that keeps this information secret from their opponent. As a unit take losses and take on fatigue, the owning player tracks these on the core display behind the screen. So this is another mechanic where we get the fog of war effect. Obviously, this is only a game to be played with players you trust, but why play it with anyone else anyway? There's not a lot of blocks on the map this way. The scale is corps, so that is each leader block represents a corps and its leader. So each side has about a dozen corps per campaign scenario. As well, some leader blocks have special abilities as indicated on the hidden corps display. The map is in point-to-point style and stretches from Königsberg in the west to Warsaw in the northeast and Graudenz in the south. It's done in a sort of painterly style, but still works well enough. It's functional enough. Important terrain features are woods, rivers, roads, bridges, and citadels, all easily discernible. And given the small number of blocks, it's rare for them to be so many units piled up on a certain location that the underlying terrain is masked. As well as being a block game, Napoleon 1807 is also a card game. There's separate decks for each side. The cards are multi-purpose, as well as having events and operation points like many CDGs. They also have a section along the bottom that works like dice. In fact, the game comes with a set of custom dice, but you have the option of playing either with the dice or using the cards for dice. It's an interesting touch. Finally, there's a few markers for things like turns and victory points. Both those tracks are on the board, so everything you need is either on the map or on your core display. Oh, I should also mention that there are different core displays depending on which scenario you're playing. And some leaders have separate blocks for separate scenarios as well, depending on how their ratings change from campaign to campaign. Setup is straightforward. Each scenario tells you where to set up each leader or a range of places to set them up if it's a free setup scenario. As well, it tells you how to set up your core display. That is, how many infantry and how many cavalry units each corps has at game start. And finally, the setup instructions will tell you which cards to pull from each side's deck, as certain cards are only used in specific scenarios or campaigns. Shuffle them up and you're ready to go. Play starts by each player drawing 3 new cards. You may keep any cards left over from previous turns, and there's no size limit. If either player draws cards with an event printed on a red background, they must immediately play that card and resolve its effects. But if more than one mandatory event card is drawn, all of these mandatory events are discarded without any of them being played, but no replacement cards are issued. So if you draw a mandatory event that is terrible for you, you got to hope that your opponent has drawn one as well, so they're both nullified. Then each player can play one event from their hand, starting with the French player. Choices are made here as you have the standard tension of how best to use this card for its event, or do I keep it for the event later, or maybe save it for a future initiative phase. Speaking of initiative phase, that's what happens next. Both players must play a card face down and then reveal. The card with the higher operations points goes first. In the case of a tie, the French player goes first. And then these cards are discarded. So that's another card gone from your hand without being available for operations. Finally, we get the operations phase. This is where you can play cards and use your units to move, initiate combat, or do both. You take turns activating units or stacks of units. You don't need to use a card to activate a unit, you just pick which one. The remaining cards in your hand are used for events, such as bonuses in combat or movement, or events that disrupt your opponent's combat and movement. Or they can be held for one other use, as explained later, or held for a future turn. After all units have been activated or both players have passed, there's a recovery phase where you get a chance to get rid of accumulated fatigue points. If you didn't activate a core this turn, that core gets to shed all their fatigue points. But for the core that you did activate, you can choose one of those core and play a card from your hand to reduce its fatigue by the amount shown on the bottom of the card. And then finally, if any of your cores have high fatigue, they're going to lose a strength point. Back to the movement and combat. This may rub you the wrong way if you really like to plan every single move, as this game has a sort of roll to move mechanic. Once you've activated a unit, you draw a card from your deck. The ops point on that card are the movement points you get for that unit, usually 1 to 4. Movement is point to point with possible fatigue points, depending on how many movement points you spend that turn, and whether you began or ended your movement in a locale with an enemy unit. So even though you may want to move 3 or 4 spaces, if you draw that 1 or the 2, you're going to slow right down. When both sides have units in a locale, combat may be initiated. This is a matter of drawing a certain number of cards or a certain number of dice, if you're using dice, by each player. The number of cards drawn depends on the strength of the units, special leader bonuses, and special events cards being played, and terrain. Once the attacker and defender have calculated how many cards they get, they flip over that many cards each, and the cards will tell you, each of them, how many hits and fatigue they've inflicted on the other guy. Whoever inflicts the highest amount of losses is the winner of the battle, and the loser retreats. Mimicking the dice, the cards have the same distribution of hits and fatigue, a 1 hit, a 2 hit, a 1 fatigue, or a no result whatsoever. There's a victory track printed on the board to keep track of the score. You score a victory point just for eliminating a strength point from an enemy unit, and 1 victory point for controlling a fortified town. And then at the end of the game, there's also victory points awarded for contesting enemy citadels. As well, if either player gets 20 points ahead of the other one at any time, it's an automatic victory. So it's fairly straightforward to learn and get going. I'd messed around with it a bit on my own before my first live play, as had my opponent, and we got started and were playing within 10 minutes. The rule book is only 20 pages long, and there's a basic game set of rules to start with before adding in the grognard rules. Well, really, these are just a few things. If you're playing the basic rules, you can lessen the fog of war by not screening your core displays and by placing the blocks face up on the map rather than facing yourself. And then, other than that, the only other added rule for experienced players is the addition of something called cavalry vedettes. These are blocks in your color, but they don't represent actual troops. Instead, they add a little bit of fog of war, extra fog of war to the game, as your opponent initially won't know which units of yours are troops and which are vedettes. As soon as they're revealed to be vedettes, they're removed. That makes them sort of like dummy units, I suppose. In both of my opposed plays, we played with them and we loved them. That uncertainty was definitely tension-inducing. So, the components are great, the rules straightforward and fairly easy. How does it feel when you actually play? Well, pretty great, really. I'm not well read on Napoleonic history, so I can't comment on how this set of games fares in terms of historicity, but it was terrific fun to play. The 3 levels of Fog of War really keeps both players tense for the whole game. I really like the number of units in play. Having just the core markers on the map with their forces off mat not only produces Fog of War, but it also makes for a really elegant onboard experience. I'd be interested to hear back from some real Napoleonic diehards to see what they think about this series. There are vassal modules for the games of this series. I haven't tried them out yet. As I said, my only plays so far have been face to face, but I'm sure they'll help with maintaining the fog of war as well. Anyway, that's it for Napoleon 1807. I look forward to playing it as well as 1806 and 1815 now that I've kind of got the system down. I should also mention before closing here that 1815 is also playable by 3 players, so keep that in mind for sessions when you have a third wheel. Okay, time to hear from Kevin Bertram. Previously, I'd only really known Kevin from his design and publishing work and from following him on Twitter, where he's a quick wit and a delight to interact with. Meeting him in person was just as I'd expected, so here's our conversation that took place down at San Diego HistCon. I hope you enjoy it.
There we go. Okay. Hello, it's Pushing Cardboard, and I'm here at the San Diego HistCon with Kevin Bertram from Shores Games. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm great. We're on the final day of the last leg of this epic convention. How's it been for you?
It's been wonderful, although I find the older I get, the more tired I get on the last day. So.
I'm tired by the 10 o'clock on the first day. Those days of going all day and then going out for a drink afterwards, I think those are in my rearview mirror.
They're coming to an end, certainly.
When you come to an event like this representing Fort Circle Games as you do you spend all your time demoing, or do you get any time to play, or?
I find that I spend most of my time either demoing or looking at games that people want to pitch me.
Right.
And I rarely get to play games at a convention for my own personal enjoyment, which is unfortunate. I mean, of course, I enjoy demoing our own games, and I enjoy looking at new designs. That's very fun. But I would have loved to have played Land and Freedom here with someone, but I just never had the time.
Right,
so.
Right. When you're not at a convention and working for your own company, do you still get a chance to play, or how much time is?
I play. So I'm very lucky that this is my full-time job, and I work from home. And my wife, who is an excellent gamer, works from home, and so we've played over 700 games of Dune Imperium together.
Oh my God!
That was a little pandemic-heavy set of games, and games like Targai or Terraforming Mars or things like that. The more heavy historical games aren't quite my wife's interest, but I live in Washington D.C., and so Volker Runkeep lives there, and Sebastian Bay, and Jason Matthews, and Akar, and so many other people I get a chance to play with. So it's not hard to find a game.
I am very jealous when I see your guys' Wednesday night game club reports sometimes on the internet.
And the best thing about that is the store that hosts us is a wonderful store, and then there's just so many. I mean, Ed Beach was the person who did it this past Wednesday, and the opportunity to meet these amazing designers.
Right, we had Vocal Runke drop in, we had Ed Beach drop in. It's just it'd be like we had Brad Pitt drop in. It's like those guys are major designers for sure. Did you? How long has Fort Circle been a thing?
So I formed the company in 2017. But I had another company that I was wrapping up some contracts with that was going to take 2 to 3 years to finish. And so, although I technically started in 2017, we didn't do our first Kickstarter until 2019. We delivered our first game in 2020.
And that was Shores of Tripoli.
And that was the Shores of Tripoli, which we've been very happy with. We had a 5,000 print run. It's almost sold out. Yeah. And I'm very pleased. New York Magazine said it was the best two-player game of 2020. I don't know if that's actually true, but
I'll take it where you can get it.
Certainly,
So. Was that your first design?
And that was my first design. So.
Oh, fantastic! And I was a Kickstarter guy on that, or ordered directly from you, one or the other. But the components also of that are gorgeous. You guys seem to have a bit of, I just picked up a copy you sold me a copy of Votes for Women, and the components in there, I haven't played the game yet, but it's you guys, you take components seriously.
Well, so I put myself in the role of the consumer, and in fact, I wasn't sure if I was going to publish Shores of Tripoli. I looked at having other publishers do it, and there are certainly some wonderful publishers who would have been great for it, but, they have timelines, and that weren't quite the same as mine, and they also, I didn't think would give it the same love that I would give it.
Right.
And so I kind of wanted to create games that were interesting, fairly accessible, but yet also were like people were like, wow, like there's wow factor there. And so that was the goal with Shores of Tripoli. It's go with Votes for Women and our additional games that we'll keep doing that. So
I wondered when I initially looked at your game, it made me think of the fact that there's a big push in our community, and San Diego HISCON is a big part of it, about bringing more people in and expanding what historical games can be about. And I looked at your components and the layout, and I thought, there must have been some kind of a thought about, I want to make this game as accessible as possible. I don't want to scare people off with hex encounters or whatever it is about war games that might be scary. Let's make this look like a cool historical game.
The notion was, and we really do have this for all of the 2 games we've published, but it's something I keep in mind for all of our additional games, is there is a market of gamers, but I want to find a second constituency for these games. So for the Shores of Tripoli, that was Navy and military, retired or active duty personnel, or people who are just interested in history, or maybe they're curious about games, but so your neighbor who might be a big history buff, reads a lot, but has never played games. Well, this is a game that is approachable. You can play it in 45 minutes. Maybe that first teach is a little bit longer, but right, and like the ship pieces are nice and the cards are lit, it's an enjoyable adult experience.
The box top feels good.
And all of that was very deliberate, and it increases the price a little bit, and it hurts our margin a little bit, but I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to carve out a space in the industry of being kind of topics that are a little offbeat, but with a really good, beautiful presentation, and that matters. So,
well, we'll get back to the part about margin later, because your business plan is totally interesting. But in terms of to stick with Shores of Tripoli for a minute, what made that be the topic of your first design? What brought you to that?
So it's actually rather silly. I read a book on the First Barbary War. It was rather light. It was by a Fox News personality, so I can't say the history and it was great, but I was like, this is a fascinating story. And so then I got Ian Toll's Six Frigates, which is an amazing book.
He's a great writer.
He's great, and that really convinced me there's a game here, but I wanted to buy a game.
Right.
There is no game on the subject. And so I'm like, I've been in the game community quite a while. I know what I like in a game, and so and the nice thing is, we talk about the game being accessible, but that was also sort of forced by the fact that not a lot happened in the war. I mean, just enough happened for that there's a game there, but it wasn't too overwhelming, and so that really, it just happened to work perfect for what I ended up wanting to do.
I think I've heard Volko Runke kind of say the same thing about Wilderness Noir. When he was in college, he was sort of obsessed with the French Indian War, and there were no good games about it, and so he started making his own. And I think this might be a common inroad for cool designs.
Let's hope so.
Were you a big historical gamer before you decided to start designing?
Yes, so I never played Candyland with my father. Like when I was 5 and 6 years old, I was playing Feudal, Risk, and then Axis and Allies came out, and that was pretty great. And then I sort of kept on that path to play like Avalon Hill games when I was in high school. And as you go to college, you have more time to play, and then you start a career and start a family, and you have less time. And so I was, I always loved playing games. I always loved the challenge of them, and so, and in fact, my wife and I got engaged over a game of Scrabble. So, there's always been an appreciation for games. But
that's my wife and I. That's our go-to game.
We haven't played in a while because we started playing, other games. But keep score, and I found that I think so. One year I won like 2 more games. But my wins were usually narrower, and her wins were great. So she had more points on the year. But anyway, I've always kind of been interested in games, and my undergrad work was in history, and so it sort of
Perfect
made
storm,
sense.
yeah.
So and I still, to this day, I love history. I love reading history. I read very little nonfiction. I mostly read, I read very little fiction. I mostly read nonfiction, and it's usually histories for the most part.
I try to go back and forth one to the other, but when I'm on the nonfiction side, it's just about always history. Even if it's biography, it's like historical biography. So you've got personally another design coming up. Is the Montezuma game yours?
Yes. Well, I have a co-designer for it, my friend Gilberto Lopez. We worked together on it. I would say it's probably more my design because we used a lot of things that I used in Shores of Tripoli, but then we worked together to expand it. So it's if Shores of Tripoli is a 45-minute game, the Halls of Montezuma is more like a 75-minute game, because even though we use like the same number of cards and there's a political phase that each has, and you have just more troops, right? There's more happening in the Mexican-American War as opposed to First Barbary War. So to do it justice, we had to make it a little bit longer and a little bit heavier, but it's still that same accessible kind of game. So
I couldn't say that I'm a good guy in terms of the history of the Marine Corps, but I sort of think Tripoli and Montezuma are like two spots right in the song they like to sing.
Yes. Well,
how did that happen for you that you went from one to the other?
Well, it just seemed natural. The Shores of Tripoli.
From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli.
I had to. And I had a number of Marines, both enlisted and officers, active duty, retired, who played it, and they're like, well, you got to do the Halls of Montezuma next. And like, I'm getting a lot of suggestions for something in Guadalcanal, maybe Belleau Wood, like they want to keep seeing the Marine games coming.
Kevin Bertram is our man.
Yeah. Now, I also get asked a lot if I was a Marine, and I was not, but when I was in high school, I was in the delayed entry program to be in the Marines. So like every other weekend I'd go and do stuff, like getting ready for boot camp. But then I got a full ride debate scholarship for college, and my recruiter's like, there's an opt-out for people who get full rides. He's like, you should take it. Don't be dumb. Because I couldn't do both.
Right,
and he's go do it. He's like,
so you would have been a Marine.
I would have been.
But you were such a great student that...
Well, I was a good debater. I don't know if I was a great student. So
I mean, you were a good enough student to have a full ride scholarship. And you'd have been crazy to
turn that down.
Even if you'd gone into that and crashed and burned, you could have still enlisted, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So...
Well, that's funny. So do you know what your next design will be?
My next personal design? Yeah. So I have two co-designs, both with my wife. One is on Shakespeare's First Folio, which was the collection of 36 of his plays that was printed a few years after his death. And that's actually started out of a commission from the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. The Folger Shakespeare Library has the largest collection of first folios in the world, more than in England.
They're the major people in America for Shakespeare.
Yep. And so they have this great museum. There's also a theater there. The museum is being reconstructed and going under renovations. And so that will open in May. And I have a small piece for them that's an in-venue, so you can do this game in there. Right. That's very simple for kids, like anyone can play. But then they wanted, for their gift shop, a game, and it needed to be challenging enough to be interesting, and for me to put my name on. But yet still very accessible.
It needs to be accessible, but people who like Shakespeare
are bright.
They're going to want something. They don't want Candyland either.
So it's a combination of a trick-taking game, because there were 36 plays, there were 14 comedies, 12 tragedies, 10 histories. So those kind of work as suits. And then there's half of it is that trick-taking, and then half of it is sort of a worker placement where you're all rival printers, and so you're trying to print. And you need paper, type, and ink to be able to print the plays. And there's people who can help you, other printers, and actually a big thing was like widows of printers. When the printers would die, the widows were highly sought after. To because then you get all the and so there's
because it's a total misogynistic society where
the worst.
You marry the widow who just inherited a print shop. Now you have a print shop.
Yes, so there's some widows in there, and it's been a super fun process. The Folger Library has been super helpful, and they're helping us create some of the as you know, in Votes for Women, it comes with lots of extra historical things. So we're working with them to do something similar for that. And then I have a second game that is also...
Before you move on...
Oh, no. Yes.
What do your Marine friends feel about this detour into Shakespeare?
I find actually that at least Marine Corps officers that I've met are very well read.
Yeah.
So I
they're going to be okay?
I think they're going to be okay.
Okay. So then what's the next one?
And then the next one, my wife's actually more the lead on this one, but I'm doing some of I find that I'm not a very good writer or creative, but I'm pretty good at making sure the mechanics work. And so her and I work very well together. And it is on the guano trade. So
yes.
So the Guano Islands Act of 1856 was passed, and it allowed Americans any island that was not claimed by another nation that had guano, the United States would protect your claim to it. And the reason guano was so important is because there was no artificial fertilizer at the time.
Yeah, it was fertilizer, yeah.
And there were some islands off of Peru that had the best, because for some reason just where the islands are situated, there would be no rain, and so the bird guano would pile up these massive piles. So that was the best guano.
Right. So anybody listening at home who doesn't know what bird guano is it's bird shit. This is. I mean, where I come from on the prairies, we use pig manure, and we spread that on the fields too. But the bird.
Evidently, the bird is the best.
Is the best. Yeah.
And so the game is that you are a guano company, and there are a bunch of them: the Pacific Guano Company, the American Guano Company, Standard Guano Company.
Right. Yeah.
And so you start the game, and you are trying to, find more islands with guano, sell it to the market. But then the way you don't get the thing that my wife and I agree on is that what we hate about economic games is whoever has the most money wins. That's boring.
Right.
So there's a second part of the game, and the less time you're working, but the more time you're buying mansions and baubles and taking trips to France and these kind of things, that's what's getting you points. So it's like a work-life balance.
Right. It's not so much how much money you make, but how much fun and happiness you can have.
With that money. And now, the Gilded Age is full of some absurdities, and those will definitely be in the game. And there is also kind of a little subtle criticism of you're turning shit into gold, which
good.
I'm very fond of.
That sounds right up my alley. That sounds great. So, let's talk a little bit then also about Votes for Women, because that's the other big game of your company. That's Tori Lynn is the designer.
Yes,
that's a game on getting the women enfranchised to vote.
So it's about the passage of the 19th Amendment. It starts in 1848, which is kind of an arbitrary date, but that's sort of the general history that people think of. It starts in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention, and it goes through to 1920 when the amendments passed. And luckily, the U.S. Constitution wrote the rules for us, because to pass a constitutional amendment, you need Congress to pass it. It's 3/4 in each house, and then you need, or 2/3, and then you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. So we kind of abstracted out the congressional part, and then the fight is in the states.
The fight is in the states, right.
And Tori did amazing research. It was during the pandemic. She was unemployed at the time, so she had quite a bit of time to research. And although I wasn't particularly employed because we couldn't print any games at the time. And so we just had a lot of fun working on it. We certainly drew a lot of inspiration from a game like Watergate and a game like 1960.
Game.
So, it's not groundbreakingly new in design, but it is certainly new. It takes things in a different direction that I think are pretty solid. I'm very pleased with. So
I think Amabel Holland has a game on a similar topic maybe, but those are the only two. This feels like like one of the new directions that historical gaming is going. And I've got a friend who's a female friend back home, and when I told her that I was coming down to this convention, and she wanted to know about what I was doing with wargaming and stuff, and I was explaining how the hobby is changing and stuff, and I told her about Nicaea, the Hollenspiel game, and my friend's an ex-Catholic, and she was just like, oh, if you can get a copy of that. And then I told her about Votes for Women, and then she said, oh my God, we have to play that. And it's like, she just had no idea, she thought historical gaming was still going to be like a bunch of games on the Battle of the Bulge. And so, there's a whole more audience out there for people who like games, but maybe they want some history with it. They like my friend, she's not much into Euros, but if it's got some history in it, she's right there.
Yeah, and I want to, I don't want like traditional war gamers to be like threatened, because I like a good Bulge game too.
Yeah, same
right?
here.
But I like more than just a Bulge. I guess I'm sort of an omni gamer. I like, Terraforming Mars and there's games that I like. I don't like the ones that have just a super pasted on theme, so I'm not, and that's kind of where Euros were for a long time.
Right.
And I'll play them because I like, I'll play whatever the people want to play. But if there's some meat to the story, the narrative, then that makes it so much better.
One of those kind of Euros could grab me if the mechanism is so cool that I don't care what the theme is, but the theme will often bug me because it is just pasted on.
Yes.
But when the mechanisms of the game mesh with the history, that's when I feel like we're striking gold.
Yes, absolutely. So
and people want to do it, I think we're seeing people come over from Eurogaming now that there's there's historical games with a little more meat on the bone. And towards what you were saying before, I don't think the world of games being published is like a limited pie where if we make more historical games, we can't have some Bulge games. We're getting new publishers to make the new games. I can't buy all the games that are made every year. So the old grogs that get threatened by they think their way of life is going away. I think that's just some sort of a fear that I don't know where it comes from, but I recognize it's out there. I wish it wasn't.
Yeah, and I think that it's actually positive because newer, younger, more diverse people come into the hobby, and some of them are going to want to play some massive Stalingrad game. Maybe not very many of them, but we need to since the 70s, people are like, oh, the hobby's graying, the hobby's dying, and it ebbs and it flows. But as long as there's new blood coming in, and I think this is an avenue of new blood coming into the hobby. And like I say, I like playing a game like Here I Stand, which, sometimes we joke Here I Sit because it's an 8 or 12 hour game, but it's that compelling.
But it's engaging.
But someone who's never played a game is not going to play that, right? They're going to need to get up to speed on games and how to, and that's good. I think that's good for all of us.
You have to develop to see if you have a taste for that long of an experience. But then if you do, a game like Here I Stand is going to be very satiating for somebody who wants a long experience like that.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it. One of the other things I think about, just to totally go in a different direction for a moment, when I think about your company, I think about you've been incredibly transparent in terms of sort of your business plan, but right down to the finances and what it costs to make a game, what it costs to promote a game, what you spend in traveling to conventions and all that. I found that thrilling, but I wanted to know what you felt you got out of being so transparent.
Well, so we were talking about what we like to read. I mostly like to read histories, but occasionally I like to read business histories too.
Yeah.
A book about Hasbro or a book about Facebook. I mean, I find these interesting, and yet I'm always kind of frustrated. It's hard to. Well, if they're a publicly traded company, you do get numbers, but even then, it's kind of opaque. And I'm like, when I started looking at the board game industry, there were a couple people. Jamie Stegmaier had a blog, and James Math had a blog that talked about some of it, but I was like, that's helpful, but what am I getting? So I want to do the same thing, but I'm like, what am I getting by keeping those numbers back? Like, I don't really care. Like, I have to tell the IRS what I'm making anyways. I might as well. And if this is helpful for people so they don't make some terrible mistake or how they allocate, like, and if I make mistakes, and I certainly make mistakes, I don't mind, like, this was a mistake, right? Like, we sent 300 games to Gamma to send out to stores, and that was like a mistake that cost us this much money. Like, that's helpful that other people be like, oh, okay, I learned something, right? And maybe they might have a different experience, but it's a touch point for them.
But at least they'll be aware of it.
And part of that is, I think I have a bit of I want to see other publishers other smaller publishers be successful. Larger publishers are fine; they can take care of themselves.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But those smaller publishers or people who are thinking about being publishers, I'd like to sort of be helpful to them. And this might sound a little cynical, but by also being so transparent, people identify with our company a little bit more, and it builds a little bit stronger bond with what we're doing. And so they're
trust and bond,
and they're like, oh, I see why they might be charging $75 for this game instead of only $60, which what I think they should charge.
Right.
Like, oh, I see the inputs, I understand why they're doing what they're doing, and so, I think that kind of transparency it's not bad, so why not do it? And there is some upside to it.
You have nothing to hide, and the upside is building a bond, as you say, with the customer. I interviewed Roger Miller from Revolution about 6 months ago, and he was quite open about some parts of their business model too. And it was just so refreshing to hear people not pretend that there was some big secret to how they do things, and Roger talked about well, we do it this way, other people do it this way, but we don't mind sitting on inventory because that's the way. We're not going to sell 2,000 in a month or something. That's your business model, and Amabel has a different one, and you have a different one as well. So that's it's great. I hope more people do it.
I actually, at this convention last year, had a great talk with Roger, and we shared a lot of information, and that I was still kind of on this transparency path, but actually I think my discussion with him really spurred me to really commit to it. And so
Right. Yeah, well, he's a good guy, so that makes sense that you guys were sort of simpatico on the same thing. You became a designer. How did it become? Did you always intend to become designer and publisher, or we touched on this a little bit, but was it just the idea that you wanted to keep the quality control in your own hands?
Yes. Like I said, I talked to other publishers, although now looking at a Worthington might have been a really good publisher for me if I didn't want to be a publisher, but I wasn't fully aware of them and I didn't know how to contact. And so, and the other people I'd talked to, it just never was the right fit. So I'm like, well, I'm going to just do this myself. I've started businesses before. I kind of know how to do all the things that you need to do. And I'm 52 now. I don't want to start another company where I have a bunch of employees. So this seemed to be just a nice fit for me.
Yeah.
I kind of lost track of what we were talking about.
Just about whether you wanted to be a publisher.
Yeah.
What brought you to self-publishing? Yeah.
Oh, right. So the other thing I was going to say is, I actually recognize that I am not a particularly innovative designer, right? I mean, the Shores of Tripoli is a simple game. It uses card-driven mechanics that have existed previously. It doesn't do anything new, but it takes it to a new area. The Halls of Montezuma, there is one piece of that I am actually very pleased with, how we've integrated sort of political will affecting bills. There's a piece there that I am very proud of.
Right. Yeah,
but in general, I recognize that I am not a gifted designer.
You don't know yet. You've only got 1.5 under your belt.
But I do think that I'm good with logistics and all of the things that go along with being a publisher, thinking outside of the box for marketing. I think the generalist skills I have are better suited as being a publisher as opposed to being a designer. So I'll still publish things, my own designs of things I like, but I recognize that I probably bring more value to the community as a publisher than as a designer.
Well, that's interesting, because that's the last thing I wanted to ask you about was, so Tori Lynn designed Votes for Women, and was it just her design, or were you guys co-designing?
So I was the developer, and
yeah.
I would say, well, all of the research is hers, all of the, or 90% of the design is hers. Jason Matthews and I both provided some input and some tweaks and stuff. However, I did all of or I coordinated all of the play testing. I mean, she did some also, but like I was the main central, and then we'd talk about it and what should we tweak and what should we fix, and that development role I was probably also better at. Whereas like I could not have done justice the way she did this amazing research.
So talking about yourself as feeling like you might have more value as a publisher, and because of all the other skills you have, you must be interested then in publishing games by other designers.
Yes.
And is that open knowledge out there, and you're getting bombarded with pitches and sell sheets and whatnot?
Well, so I will tell you our publishing schedule for next year, which I think is sort of what you're asking.
Well, no.
Well, I don't mind telling. So
no, it's good. Let's get it out there.
All right. Well, so Votes for Women reprint and the Shakespeare game and the Halls of Montezuma should all deliver in Q1.
Right. Oh, wow.
And maybe one will slip to Q2, but because the Shakespeare game needs to be here by May, and if it's not in here until May, that's fine.
Yeah.
But then, Talia Rosen has this amazing game on the history of the Supreme Court. Jason Matthews is the developer for that. The artwork has actually been very difficult getting it right because because the entire history of the Supreme Court, so we're through lots of different eras, and it's a fascinating game though, and getting that right is what we're focused on.
Feels like a pretty timely topic too, with the weirdness we've had in the Supreme Court the last few years.
So we are partnering with the Supreme Court Historical Society, and we had to there's a certain level of recency that we can't deal with just because of the sensibilities that are involved.
Fair enough.
But yes, it's a fascinating topic.
Because people are interested in why does that court seem to be so damned autonomous and answering to no one?
Well, and we give a little insight into that.
Yeah, great.
Then we have a game by Volko Ruhnke called Hunt for Blackbeard. It was originally going to be published by GMT, but GMT really likes having a solitaire option, and Volko and Jason Carr at GMT and I all agreed this is not a game that can really should be played solitaire. So GMT and Fort Circle just agreed, and Volko, we all agreed that Fort Circle would pick it up.
Fantastic.
And we will give it the Fort Circle treatment as far as the history and the components. And
you were right in my wheelhouse, because I don't play solo games. If I want to play by myself, I'll play a 2-player game solo. So I love to see somebody pushing back against the trend that everything has to have a solo mode.
Well, now this game you will not be able to play 2 players solo because it's hidden movement, because the English, the governor of Virginia is trying to find Blackbeard.
I play opposed.
Yes.
But if I was playing solo, I'd rather play a 2-player game solo.
Yeah. And that's a great design. Volko actually sort of based it on a game he did for the CIA of hunting El Chapo, and
Right.
the way he explains it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's basically the same. I mean, it's different, of course, your wooden ships and piracy, but it's basically the same.
Yeah.
And then we have Peace 1905, which won the Consume Jam game last year. Maurice Suckling led a team of 4 designers, him and 3 other designers. And when they pitched it to me at Circle DC, which is our convention in April in DC, I was... and so the topic is, it's the peace negotiations between Russia and Japan to end the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. And it's where Teddy Roosevelt gets his Nobel Peace Prize, because it happened here in America. He put them together. The reason Washington, D.C. has cherry blossoms is because of the Japanese gift for this. And when they told me the topic, I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, fine, Maurice, I like you, so I'll play it. And then I was blown away by it. And so it's fantastic.
He's an interesting designer.
Definitely.
His stuff is offbeat and cool.
I think it is hands down his best design.
Oh, great.
And I've played of course I like some of his other design, but this one is just amazing. And so I played the 2-player. They have a solitaire that I haven't seen, and I don't really great.
Yeah, great.
And then
great.
they have a 3-player version where the third player is Teddy Roosevelt, and basically you win if the treaty is like sort of in the middle.
Right.
But if Russia or Japan gets a better treaty, then they win. And so I like that idea quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, and then we have Night Witches, which is by Liz Davidson and David Thompson.
Yes.
And I was actually a tiny bit, I had a tiny bit of trepidation about it because I love David's designs, I love Liz, but I was like, I wasn't sure if it's kind of a solitaire or 2-player against a bot, and there's missions, and it's, I was like, I'm not sure if that's the direction I want Fort Circle to go, but then I played it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is fine, so.
Yeah, and David is kind of like a real guru when it comes to solo games. Like, we're good pals in a way. I really like him, even though I only play like a sliver of his games because like 2/3 of them are solo, and I'm not a big solo guy. But he's like, I don't know, he's just got the knack of.
And he has a full-time job, and he has a family.
Yeah.
So,
and he watches football, and he's like. When do you sleep?
Yes. So Jason Matthews and I are convinced that he is so perfect and so wonderful that he has actually made some kind of deal with the devil. That's the only way to explain.
Yeah, he's He's the Robert
he
Johnson of our industry.
Yes. So.
he's gone down to the crossroads. Well, that's quite a slate of other designers that you guys are publishing, and I assume at a convention like this you've been. Pitched a few times as well, or checking it out. Yeah, there's quite a few demos here.
There's some things that I think we have likely to be in 2025. Dan Bullock has a game on Afghanistan contractors that's pretty wild. We want to work together. We'll figure it out. Alex Knight has a game about John Brown, and I had looked at it previously at Origins. And it was just up until the raid, but it wasn't the raid proper. And I was like, I really like this, but I don't think you can publish a game about John Brown without the raid. And he has come back, and so we played it here. Just an amazing kind of storytelling, choose your own adventure almost type, but it's still on a board game that I actually think might be really groundbreaking and revolutionary.
Oh, cool.
So, and similarly, so Blue Panther has printed his game Land and Freedom. It is so far my favorite game of the year. I just think it's amazing. But Blue Panther prints on demand, and I love all the things they do for different publishers. But it doesn't have quite the sheen that a Fort Circle would. So so I've talked to Steve and Alex about we might. In 2025 or 2026, reprint that as a little
in a Fort Circle Deluxe edition.
Yeah. And so
the beautiful feeling blocks and
yes. So and then Jason Matthews owes me a game on the Treason Trial of Aaron Burr, but I don't think I'm going to get that till 2030 because he's pretty busy.
You know what? I talked to him yesterday about what he's got. What he's working on and thinking of, and that's the first thing he mentioned.
Oh, well.
So
he might just be catering to me, but
I don't know.
I'll believe it when I see it.
We were both talking about how much we liked the Trial of Louis Riel game, High Treason. Great game. And he said that it had inspired him to look in a similar way at the Aaron Burr thing, and then we got into a whole thing about that history.
And the history is amazing. I mean, if you already talked about it, maybe I won't recover the same ground, but it's fascinating. General Eaton from the Shores of Tripoli is in the game as a witness, or in the trial. I don't know if he'll be in the game. He's in the trial as a witness. Jefferson, who's also Jefferson's pulling the strings from the back. There's lots of.
But Jason also mentioned to me that Jefferson was so cheap that he made the Supreme Court justices also work as circuit court justices.
Well, that wasn't Jefferson. That was just the way it was.
Just the way it was, yeah. So it turns out that the trial judge is actually a sitting Supreme Court judge?
No, the Chief Justice, John Marshall.
It's John Marshall.
Yes. And so Yeah, and like I think one of the jurors is a former governor of Virginia. Henry Clay is an early lawyer for Burr, although I think that's not in Richmond. That's earlier. But like, it's just amazing. It makes you realize how fraught this country was. Our top general, General Wilkinson, is on the payroll of the Spanish crown. It's just like, the history is so absurd. I mean, it beats anything you might see on a Kardashian show. I mean, it's just, it's wild.
And that, like, the world was a smaller place then in some ways. Like, everybody's intertwined and people weren't just one thing. Like this thing about the general also being on the payroll of another guy. It was like, well, a man's got to eat, right?
Yeah, a man's got to eat, yeah.
So. Well, that sounds fantastic. I'm so glad I got to meet you, Kevin. Was there anything else you wanted to get out into the world?
I think I've taken up plenty of your time.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks again, and best of luck with Fort Circle.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Great.
Didn't I tell you he was a terrific guy? And pretty crazy the way he downplays his gifts as a designer. Shores of Tripoli is a wildly popular game, and people are eager to see his next game, Halls of Montezuma. So thanks for taking the time, Kevin, and thanks for selling me your demo copy of Votes for Women. Oh, and by the way, Votes for Women has just been added to the Rally the Troops website, if I haven't mentioned that before, which is incredible news. I've got a couple games going of it already. Bouquets. Well, my buddy Will Bauer and I, we've been helping a designer on a new project. Initially, we were brought in to help edit the rule book, but it quickly took a turn into us overhauling the Vassal module that was being used for playtesting. Well, I shouldn't say I'm overhauling the module, Will is. I'm his partner insofar as we play with the thing until we find something that breaks, and then we argue about how the best way to fix it, and then Will fixes it. I suppose we could switch hats, but I'm working on updating a completely different module and learning a lot as I go. So we're both just diving in with not a ton of experience in Vassal programming, but a smattering of experience in related fields, and we're having a good time. And that got me thinking about how the vast majority of Vassal modules were made this way, by non-paid hobbyists who just like to tinker or want to help out or just want a damn module for a game that doesn't have one. Well, I can name a few prolific module designers. Most of them work in anonymity, only rising to the surface when a module breaks. So hats off to the module makers. Often I'm in awe of what you've made, and I'm always in your debt. Parting shots. I was re-listening to my interview with Jason Matthews while working on the previous episode, and I had a bit of an epiphany. It came just in passing when we were talking about Gettysburg and why the battle was fought there. It was also in response to a conversation that had been ongoing lately about Civil War games in particular, but war games in general. The conversation exploded recently when a blogger asked, in essence, why there were no slaves in a particular ACW battle game. His reasoning was that because the war was about slavery, and no, I'm not going to debate that fact, I think he's right, and the game was fairly detailed, why wasn't slavery somehow represented in the game? I've talked before about how I'm fine with this sort of thing. I'm fine if it's added to games, but I don't feel it's needed in battle games or tactical games. And listening to my conversation with Jason, I finally realized why I felt that way. It comes down to this. When we're talking about battle games or tactical games or even operational games sometimes, are you concerned with what happened or why it happened? I'd argue that most historical gamers have a good idea of why a certain battle happened, helped by their own interest in history and perhaps the designer's notes. They're playing the game not to ascertain why a battle happened, but to play how it unfolds, to see how it happened and maybe change history. In strategic level games, the why often becomes more important. Take the Gettysburg example. Gettysburg was in no way a strategic location. There's no reason for that particular spot to be fought over. Indeed, Meade probably didn't want to fight yet. He'd just taken over the army himself. Lee wanted a battle, not because he wanted to take Gettysburg, but more probably because he was riding high after Chancellorsville, and he thought he could reduce support for the war in the North if he defeated the Army of the Potomac on its own turf. So the question of why the fight happened at Gettysburg isn't really going to be answered by playing out the Battle of the Gettysburg. And even in a strategic game, I'd bet 95% of the time, There is no Battle of Gettysburg. It's just an arbitrary spot where the two armies meet. I get that there's a growing number of players who are as interested in the why of a battle as they are in the how or the what happened parts. And I hope they find what they're looking for. I'm that way myself often. But in tactical, battle, and operational games, I'm not convinced the why always has to be included. Thanks for listening. I'll be doing another giveaway for folks who participate in the feedback survey again for this episode. So after you listen, stop by the website, register or log in, and take the survey. The link is in the podcast menu. And sure, you can take the survey without logging in as well. You just won't be entered in the prize draw. But while you're there, check out the polls in the articles menu, and you can let me know what your favorites are from the games released in the last 2 years. In the meantime, be well. Here's to a safe and happy holiday season, however and whatever you celebrate this time of year. See you next time.